At first light, a small French brig rides the swell off the western coast of France. A man in a cocked hat and his gray greatcoat steps down into a waiting boat. Sailors pull him toward a British warship, 74 guns, a veteran of battles against his own fleets. He has reached the last edge of his own country. Ahead lies the enemy's deck. Welcome to Same Day, Different Century. I'm Zach. Today is July 15th. The place is the Basque Roads, a stretch of anchorage off Rochefort on France's Atlantic coast. The date is July 15th, 1815. The man in the boat is Napoleon Bonaparte, and 27 days earlier, his last army was destroyed at Waterloo. He is now a fugitive, though a strange kind of one. 3 weeks before, he had still been Emperor of the French. On June 22nd, he abdicated for the second time, nominally in favor of his young son, a boy who would never reign. The Bourbon king he had chased out of Paris in the spring, Louis XVIII, was returning under the protection of foreign armies, and those armies were looking for him. That is the pressure that has driven Napoleon to the coast. Some Prussian leaders, whose General Blücher had helped break him at Waterloo, were said to want him executed. The restored royalists wanted him arrested. His one clear hope was the sea, a passage to the United States, where a former emperor might disappear into a new republic. 2 French frigates lay in the roadstead. Between those 2 frigates and the open ocean sat a British 74 gunship of the line, HMS Bellerophon, under Captain Frederick Lewis Maitland. Behind her stood the Royal Navy blockade that had closed the Atlantic escape route. For nearly 2 weeks, that blockade had done to Napoleon on water what Waterloo had done on land. It closed the exits. The plans considered by Napoleon's advisors failed or were abandoned. A dash by fast frigate, passage on a neutral merchant ship, even a scheme to hide him aboard and run the gauntlet. They all foundered on the same fact. The British were watching, and they were faster. To understand why the man who had ruled most of Europe now had nowhere to sail, you have to go back 100 days. In February 1815, Napoleon was in exile on Elba, a small island off the Italian coast, granted to him after his first abdication the year before. Elba was a mistake, and its makers would learn it. On the 1st of March, he landed back in France with roughly 1,000 men. Soldiers sent to stop him joined him instead. On March 20th, he walked back into Paris as Louis XVIII fled, and for a moment it seemed the old order had returned. The powers that had beaten him in 1814, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, declared him an outlaw and mobilized. Napoleon knew he could not wait to be surrounded. He marched north into what is now Belgium to strike the British and Prussian armies before the others arrived. On June 18th, near a village called Waterloo, the plan failed. Wellington's Anglo-Allied army held its ground through the day. Late in the afternoon, Blücher's Prussians arrived on the French flank, and Napoleon's army broke. That single day is the hinge of everything that follows. It destroyed not just an army, but the political fiction that he could hold France by force. He returned to Paris to find the legislature turning against him. He abdicated on June 22nd and withdrew to Malmaison, the country house that had belonged to his first wife, Josephine, who had died the year before. On June 29th, he left it for the coast, reaching Rochefort on July 3rd. There, the trap closed. Napoleon's agents tested every route. The frigate captains doubted they could outrun the blockade. A neutral crossing required papers the British would not grant. Younger officers proposed hiding him and slipping out. He could not stake his dignity on a smuggler's trick. And all the while, time worked against him. The new government in Paris was consolidating, and an order for his arrest was expected any day. Falling into French or Prussian hands was the one outcome he was determined to avoid. So he turned to the ship that had been blocking him. On July 10th, he sent 2 officers to Captain Maitland to ask whether he might be allowed to sail for America. Maitland answered that he could promise no such thing, but that he could receive Napoleon aboard and carry him to England to await his government's decision. Over the following days, messages passed back and forth across the water. Napoleon's companions later insisted that Maitland had encouraged them to expect honorable and generous treatment in England. Maitland, in his own written account, was firm that he had promised nothing beyond passage and a fair hearing. Whether Napoleon was misled or misled himself, he made his choice believing, or needing to believe, that Britain would treat him as a guest rather than a captive. On July 13th, he wrote a letter to Britain's Prince Regent, the future George IV. In it, he cast himself as a suppliant, in the classical mode, invoking the exiled Athenian statesman Themistocles, who had once thrown himself on the mercy of the enemy he had fought. He came, he wrote, like Themistocles, to sit at the hearth of the British people and place himself under the protection of their laws. It was, in its way, a careful piece of theater, and also the act of a man out of moves. Early on the morning of July 15th, he boarded a small French brig, the Epervier, which carried him out to the Bellerophon. He climbed to her deck. By Captain Maitland's account, Napoleon told him he had come to place himself under the protection of British law. Napoleon believed he had surrendered himself to British protection. Britain treated the act as surrender to a victorious power. Then a question with no clear answer took hold. What exactly was he now? The war was not formally over, no peace had yet been signed. Yet Napoleon himself had abdicated. He was not quite a prisoner of war, and plainly not a guest. The British government and its allies resolved the puzzle by simple decision. They would treat him as their prisoner, with Britain as his jailer. The Bellerophon sailed for England and reached Torbay on July 24th, then moved to Plymouth. What followed was one of the odder spectacles of the age. Word spread quickly that Napoleon, the monster of years of British caricature, was sitting in the harbor aboard a British ship. Sightseers put out on hired boats by the thousands, crowding the water to glimpse him at the gangway. He remained a prisoner the entire time, never permitted to land. Napoleon expected to argue his case in Britain, but British ministers decided he would never be allowed to land. That refusal was deliberate, and it points to a real anxiety. If Napoleon touched English ground, English common law might reach him, and English law had inconvenient habits, like habeas corpus. In fact, British sympathizers pursued a writ of habeas corpus, while a lawyer, using Napoleon as a witness in his own libel case, obtained a subpoena that would have required Napoleon's production in court. To avoid the risk, and with his removal to St. Helena already decided, Admiral Lord Keith had the ship put out to sea, beyond the paper's reach. The decision on where to send him had already been made, and it was shaped by the lesson of Elba. Elba had been close, comfortable, and escapable. This time the powers chose St. Helena, a small volcanic island in the South Atlantic, more than 1,000 miles from the nearest mainland, ringed by open ocean and a garrison. There would be no landing party of loyal soldiers, no quiet boat to the coast. In early August, Napoleon was transferred to another ship, HMS Northumberland, for the long voyage south. He protested the whole arrangement as a betrayal of the trust in which he claimed to have surrendered. It changed nothing. He reached St. Helena in October 1815 and never left. He died there in 1821, still arguing his case to the small circle of followers who had gone into exile with him. Waterloo is usually remembered as the end of Napoleon. In truth, Waterloo ended his army. July 15th ended his options. The battle could have been survived. He had survived defeat before and come back. The surrender is what made the fall permanent, because it delivered him into the one set of hands willing and able to put him somewhere he could not return from. With that, the wars that had convulsed Europe under his name for the better part of 2 decades were finally, definitively, over, and the settlement created at Vienna could now be enforced without fear of his return. The problem his surrender raised has proved more durable than his empire. What a victorious state owes a defeated enemy who lays down his sword and asks not for battle, but for mercy. That same day, different century. I'm Zach. We'll be back tomorrow with another date, another story. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, it's Zach. Real quick before you go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed the show, all I ask is that you share it with someone that you think would enjoy it too. That's the best way to help us out. I'll see you tomorrow.